Black CEO removed from business class for white passenger. Fires entire flight crew after landing. What if someone tried to humiliate you in public, not knowing you were one of the most powerful people in the world? Imagine being treated like you don't belong, like your success, your dignity, your seat can be taken from you without question. Now imagine you say nothing. You don't raise your voice. You don't argue. You simply get up and let them think they've won. But what they don't know is that you're not just a man in a suit. You're the man who owns the company that built the technology flying this very plane. And this moment? It's not the end of your story. It's the start of theirs. The terminal was busy like always. People rushing, phones ringing, families huddled near gates with tired eyes and coffee cups. At gate B-22, a tall black man in a dark, clean suit walked in quietly. He rolled a small carry-on behind him, and a leather messenger bag hung from one shoulder. He didn't wear a name tag. No one recognized him. And that's exactly what he wanted. To most people, he looked like just another business traveler. But he wasn't. He was a billionaire, a tech founder, and this flight was no accident. He stopped beside a support column and checked his phone. A soft vibration. A message from his assistant. Everything was set. "Morning, Taylor," he said, speaking calmly. "All in place?" "Yes, sir. System flagged you exactly as predicted. 78% chance of being bumped. Business class overbooked. They'll need to make space." He nodded once, not surprised. "Good. Let's see what they do." He ended the call and headed toward boarding, melting into the line like anyone else. At the gate counter, a supervisor named Mara scanned the passenger list with narrowed eyes. "Cole, 4B... Huh," she muttered. "Isn't that the standby guy?" asked another staff member beside her. "Yeah, I don't like the look of that." "Why not?" Mara didn't answer, just gave a look. That was enough. Minutes later, boarding began. The man scanned his pass, thanked the agent politely, and walked onto the plane. He found his seat, 4B, business class, window. He placed his bag above and took out only a slim notebook and pen. No laptop, no noise, just quiet focus. A flight attendant passed. "Water, please," he said softly. She brought it without a word. 2 rows behind, a woman watched him. She was a journalist, though no one would have known. She had that instinct. She'd seen enough in her career to spot stories before they happened. Something about this man. His stillness, his eyes, his silence. He wasn't just here to travel. Boarding continued until a man in an expensive suit walked in late, loud, and annoyed. "Make it happen," he barked into his phone. "I need to be in business class. No excuses." That was Edward, son of a board member, son of privilege. When he reached the cabin door, Mara greeted him with the kind of warmth reserved for VIPs. "Mr. C, welcome. Let me see what I can do." She tapped on her screen, then looked down the aisle. Her eyes landed on seat 4B. Moments later, she was standing over him. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, smiling tightly. "There's been a booking error. We'll need to move you to economy." He looked up from his notebook. Calm. "I booked this 3 months ago." "Yes. Well, sometimes the system messes up. We appreciate your cooperation." He didn't argue. He didn't ask for proof. He simply closed his notebook, stood up, and nodded. He walked to row 27, a cramped middle seat between a crying baby and a man with no sense of personal space. He sat down and waited, because he already knew. Every word, every look, every choice made by that crew was being recorded. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a test, and they had just failed it. The moment he sat down in that tight, Economy seat, with a baby crying next to him and knees jammed against the tray table. He could feel it. The shift. The looks. The assumptions. The way people's eyes slid past him now, barely registering his presence. Up in business class, the man who had taken his seat, Edward, was already ordering his second drink and talking loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "My father basically saved this airline," he said to the passenger beside him. "There's always room up front when you've got the right name." The passenger nodded awkwardly, clearly not sure how to respond. Meanwhile, the man in 27B, the same man whose name was quietly engraved on the patents inside the very aircraft they were flying, pulled out his phone and sent one message. "Test proceeding as expected. Continue monitoring." He looked around. No one recognized him. No one knew. That was the point. He didn't need to wear power on his sleeve. He had spent years designing systems that revealed the truth behind the scenes. Now, those same systems were tracking everything around him. Who got assistance first? Whose call button was answered faster? Who was offered coffee? Who wasn't? It was all data now, and it was all being collected. But even more than the data, he watched the people, like the young flight attendant near the back, nervous but kind, who kept glancing toward him with something close to guilt. Her name tag said L. Park, and though she didn't say anything, he could feel she knew something wasn't right. She brought him a drink later, tomato juice, no ice, and as she handed it to him, she whispered, "I'm sorry about your seat. That's not normal procedure." He looked up at her quietly. "I know," he said. "Thank you." Their eyes met just for a moment. She didn't know exactly who he was, but she understood something was different about him. Meanwhile, 2 rows up, the journalist was taking notes on her phone. She had already seen it happen. The downgrade, the way he was spoken to, the difference in how other passengers were treated. She was building a picture, not just of a man unfairly moved, but of a culture, a system, that made decisions based on appearance, not merit. On the other side of the plane, the flight supervisor, Mara, was holding a quiet conversation with another crew member. "Good call on moving him," she said. "We needed that seat for a real VIP." The other crew member laughed. "Yeah, he just went without a word. Smart guy, knew his place. They didn't know they were being overheard. They didn't know that 2 phones, one in a flight attendant's apron, one in a journalist's jacket, were both recording. That was the thing about quiet people. You never saw them coming, until it was too late. Back in row 27, the CEO shifted in his seat and looked at the window. He thought of his grandmother. She used to say, "They can take your seat, they can take your comfort, but they can't. Take what's in your head. That's yours. And one day, that's what will change the world." He had believed her, still did. And now, here he was, not just a passenger, but a witness. A mirror, a test. The airline didn't know it yet, but they had just exposed themselves to someone who wasn't just watching, but recording, planning, and preparing a public reckoning that would start before the wheels even touched down. He pulled out a thin folder from his bag. Inside, case studies, past complaints filed against this airline, patterns of random downgrades that always seemed to affect the same kind of passengers. People who looked like him, who sounded like him, who didn't fit the profile of a premium traveler. The math was all there, but numbers alone don't move people. So he had decided to be the story, to feel it, live it, get moved, get ignored, get dismissed, and then reveal exactly who he was in front of the world. A few rows ahead, Edward turned again to his seatmate. "Honestly," he said, swirling the last of his whiskey, "it's about standards. That's why I hate when they let just anyone into business class. Brings the whole experience down." The woman beside him smiled politely but didn't respond. In the row behind them, The journalist typed one more note into her phone. Privilege doesn't whisper. It shouts and expects silence in return. But this time, silence wouldn't be the ending. It would be the beginning of something much louder. In the quiet hum of the cabin, something was building. Not noise, not chaos, but pressure. It sat beneath the surface of polite greetings and forced smiles, under the rustle of newspapers and clink of glasses. It was in the way people were looked at, or not looked at. The way decisions were made when no one thought they were being watched, but someone was watching. The man in 27B sat calmly, back straight, journal open on his tray table. To anyone passing by, he looked like a quiet traveler, making the best of a cramped seat. But inside that open notebook, he wasn't writing random thoughts. He was documenting timestamps, flight attendant movements, passenger interactions. He wasn't angry. He was studying. At the front of the plane, Edward laughed again, this time louder than before. They should just make economy its own airline, he joked to his seatmate. No offense, but some of these people don't belong in the same airspace. No one said a word. Some pretended not to hear. Others looked down. The journalist, 2 rows behind him, typed steadily. She had covered political campaigns, corporate exposés, hospital corruption. But this was different. It wasn't just one man's story. It was a pattern unfolding live. She zoomed in with her phone camera and captured a still image. The relocated man quietly helping an elderly woman lift her carry-on. In the background, a flight attendant, arms crossed, watching without offering to help. She uploaded the photo to a private online folder, captioned it simply, "Ignored by crew, helped by the man they downgraded." Back in economy, the baby next to the CEO was wailing again. The mother looked exhausted, clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, bouncing her child. "No need," the man replied softly. "We were all new to flying once." He handed the baby a small, silent toy from his bag. The baby quieted. The mother looked at him, almost surprised. "You're really kind," she said. He just smiled. "I'm just listening. That's all." A few rows behind, a young flight attendant, the one who had apologized earlier, was watching again. She kept seeing the same thing. Who got smiled at? Who got dismissed? Who got warned for disrupting the aisle? And who got a pass? For loudly stomping through it. She wasn't naive. She had seen favoritism before. But this felt sharper, intentional. Earlier in the galley, she had overheard Mara whisper to another crew member, "Watch that guy. He didn't make a fuss, but you never know with those types. Quiet ones are tricky. Those types?" The words had stung, and not just because of what was said, but because of how casually it was said. Like this was normal. The flight attendant checked her pocket. Her phone was still recording. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do with it. But she knew one thing. She couldn't unsee this anymore. Back in business class, Edward had his feet stretched out like he owned the entire row. "Honestly, my father told me, it's not discrimination if it's policy," he told his neighbor. "They're not targeting anyone. They're just keeping standards high." The journalist tilted her head slightly. She had heard just enough. She opened her recorder app, slid the volume up. Click. The words kept coming. Dog whistles. Thinly veiled bias. The kind of stuff that slips under headlines but shapes entire systems. She didn't need to invent a story. The story was writing itself. In row 27, the CEO's phone buzzed again. A message from his lead analyst. "Speech pattern match. Passenger in 4B replaced by VIP linked to your competitor. Confirmed. Edward C." So now he knew. The man who had taken his seat wasn't just rude. He was one of the executives trying to buy out his company's patents, the very ones that protected against biased algorithms. This wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was strategic. He smiled to himself, not bitter, but focused. This was all aligning. Too perfectly. The crew, the treatment, the rival. His test had already revealed more than expected. And it wasn't over. He opened a secure folder on his phone. Inside, seeding data from past flights, complaint patterns filed against this. Airline. Upgrade versus downgrade metrics by race and name profile. Thousands of lines of proof. Still, the numbers would never be enough. That's why he was here, not to prove a theory, to feel it, to sit in 27B, to hear the way silence changed when you walked past in a darker suit with darker skin, to see how a polite man with billions behind him could still be seen as less when his name didn't sound familiar enough. Because only when the world saw it too, felt it, would it be forced to care. And this flight? This was only part one of a much bigger takeoff. From the outside, everything on board looked normal. Drinks were served, lights dimmed, passengers tapped on their phones or settled into movies. But inside the cabin, something quiet and powerful was shifting. One man had been moved, but the system was being watched. From seat 27B, the CEO glanced down at his wristwatch, not for the time, but for what it was silently transmitting. His security team had created a passive listening tool that gathered audio, device metadata, even response times from crew to passenger call buttons. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just signals, the kind you leave behind without even noticing. It was already gathering more than enough. Each moment, each word, each subtle shift in tone from one passenger to the next. The flight was cruising at 33,000 feet. But in truth, they were flying straight into a storm, not of weather, but of truth. A few rows away, the journalist had finished her third page of notes. She'd already drafted the headline in her mind. Discomfort at 30,000 feet. What one flight revealed. About silent bias and premium air travel. But the thing she hadn't expected was how calm the man in 27B remained. No angry muttering. No restless shifting. Just quiet presence. She found herself watching him now, not out of pity, but curiosity. What kind of person just let it happen? Until they didn't? What she didn't know was that this man never rushed a storm. He studied its winds, and then flew straight through it. In the rear galley, the junior flight attendant stood over a tray of coffee cups, trying to steady her hands. Her thoughts were racing. She had just checked the in-flight tablet, something the lead supervisor had carelessly left open. One passenger name caught her attention. D. Cole. And right next to it, a red flag. She frowned. That didn't make sense. He had booked months in advance, confirmed, checked in early. Why would the system mark him as a seat reassignment candidate? She remembered something her brother told her once. He had studied data science in college before his life got flipped. Upside down. They don't always need to say they're targeting you, he said. They just create rules that make it look random. Suddenly it clicked. This wasn't just bias in how people were treated. It was in the code. She pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and started typing, "System flagged D. Cole. No justification." Supervisor Mara gave seat to known VIP. Passenger moved without explanation. Repeated pattern seen before with similar profiles. She didn't know where she'd send it yet, but she knew this had to be written down. Meanwhile, Mara and another, senior crew member were in the front galley whispering with laughter. "I told you. When in doubt, downgrade quietly," Mara said. "Don't argue, just move the seat. They don't complain if you do it soft." "Worked like a charm," the other replied. And the VIP didn't even notice. "What's he gonna do? Post about it." She chuckled. "Let him. No one cares about mistakes and seat assignments. We've got it all covered under protocol. But they were wrong. Someone was listening, and that someone had already tagged their voices and synced the time codes to the official flight manifest. Every whisper, every word. Because this wasn't just a bad flight, it was a pattern, and now it had a face, a name, a camera, and soon, a microphone. Back in economy, the CEO typed a message into his phone, encrypted and routed through 3 firewalls before it reached his team. Postpone Geneva reveal. Something bigger is happening. Confirm all monitoring protocols are active. This airline's numbers match our predictive bias index exactly. Full capture required. The reply came in seconds. Confirmed. FAA notified. Civil rights team standing. I recommend initiating Phase 2. He stared at the screen for a moment, then tapped a single word. Proceed. Elsewhere, the journalist checked her feed. A photo she'd anonymously uploaded of the man helping a passenger had started to circulate. No name, just a caption. He was removed from business class, then helped. An elderly woman with her bag while the crew ignored her. It was gaining traction, retweets, shares, comments. People were starting to ask questions. In her notes, she added one line, "This is no longer a story. It's a spark, and sparks have a way of catching fire." Meanwhile, Edward, still sipping scotch in his upgraded seat, leaned over to the flight supervisor who had made the switch. "Thanks again for the bump," he whispered. "My father will hear about this. You've earned yourself a mention." Mara smiled, tight and proud. She had no idea the man they shoved back to 27B could buy the airline they worked for 5 times over. She had no idea he wasn't there for a comfortable ride. He was there to prove a point, and by the time they landed, they would all know exactly what that point was. What they thought was a quiet downgrade was about to become a national wake-up call. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thump. Most passengers barely noticed. Some stirred from naps. Others glanced at their watches. A few reached for their bags too early. But in seat 27B, the man who had said almost nothing for 6 hours opened his eyes. The descent wasn't just physical. It was personal, because while the rest of the cabin thought they were almost home, for him, the real arrival was just beginning. From the outside, this looked like the end of a typical long-haul flight. Inside, the storm that had been quietly gathering all flight long was about to break open. The captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Local time is 6:45 p.m. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." In the front galley, Mara straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, and gave herself a final once-over in the reflective oven panel. She had no idea the next person waiting at the gate wasn't a hotel shuttle. It was a federal agent. Back in row 27, the man's phone buzzed once. A quiet message from his legal team. "All in position. Gate secured. FAA and press standing by. You may proceed." He nodded slightly and slipped the phone into his jacket. Across the aisle, the journalist looked up from her tablet. The feed she'd been monitoring, one she created in secret just after takeoff, was exploding. Photos, passenger stories, comment threads growing by the second. Business class bias was now trending in 3 major cities, still anonymous, still under the radar, but no longer invisible. Near the exit row, the young flight attendant, the only one who had dared to speak to him like a human being, stood frozen. She had just seen a name flash on the crew app she wasn't supposed to access. Not the seat number, the full name, and now she knew. The man she had apologized to? The one she'd seen help the baby, speak kindly to the tired mother, and carry a stranger's bag. He was the founder of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. A billionaire. An ethics innovator. A man who had personally developed systems to detect hidden bias in corporations. The very thing this airline had just handed to him, gift-wrapped at 33,000 feet. She stared toward row 27, heart pounding. Had she just been part of something historic? Or just another witness, afraid to speak up? Back in business class, Edward was still scrolling through emails when he stopped cold. His company's internal alert system had just flagged a post gaining traction. An anonymous thread titled, "They moved a black executive to economy so I could sit in his seat." And I said nothing. His eyes narrowed. He turned around casually, looked toward the back, and saw the man he assumed was just another quiet nobody, now calmly standing, jacket on, briefcase in hand, making eye contact, direct, steady, certain. Something twisted in Edward's stomach. As the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began to gather their belongings. But the door, it didn't open. The captain stepped out of the cockpit and looked confused. A woman in a dark suit had entered through the jet bridge and was speaking to the flight staff in hushed tones. Then came another, and another. Black suits. Government. IDs? Airport security. They weren't here to clean the cabin. They were here for answers. "Everyone needs to remain on board," the lead officer said calmly but firmly. "This is now an active federal investigation." Murmurs swept through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other, unsure whether this was serious or just a delay, but the man in 27B remained still. Composed. This was always the plan. Mara stormed forward, forcing a smile. "Excuse me, what is this about? We followed all procedures." The lead officer cut her off. "We have reason to believe there were discriminatory decisions made during the boarding and seating process. All crew will remain for questioning." Edward stood now, clearly rattled. "I demand to leave. I have an urgent—" "You'll be staying too," said another officer. "We'll be asking about your interactions with flight crew regarding seating reassignment." "Do you know who I am?" Edward snapped. "Yes," the officer replied flatly. "And so do the people who just accessed your call logs from 37,000 feet. At that moment, the man from 27B stepped forward, moving quietly toward the front. The aisle parted for him like water. He stopped beside the captain and looked at the full crew, Mara included, all standing stiffly under pressure. Then, softly, he said, "You thought I'd forget this flight after a bad seat. You thought I'd walk away, stay quiet, not make a fuss." He looked around. "But you didn't realize. This seat wasn't taken from me. It was given to me. By you. You showed me your system. And now the world's going to see it too." Gasps. Silence. Phones recording. The journalist, now standing behind him, raised her phone slightly and whispered to herself, "This story just became history." Outside the plane, media vans were lined up like dominoes. Inside, the truth had landed, and no one could unhear it. The man didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need revenge. He had receipts, data, witnesses, and now, the microphone. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a correction, and for the first time on that flight, the crew finally realized they had moved the wrong man. They say, the wheels touched down at 6:45 p.m., but for the airline, for the crew, and for the man in 27B, the real impact didn't hit until after the doors opened. Inside the terminal, dozens of cameras waited. Journalists whispered into their microphones. Security personnel cleared walkways with calm urgency. And in one corner, under the soft white light of a makeshift press zone, stood a woman in a gray coat holding a tablet close to her chest. Her name was Taylor, and she had spent the last 6 hours directing a digital operation from the ground. Now, with a simple tap, she began uploading everything, every audio file, every time-stamped note, every recorded moment of silence, dismissal, and bias. It all went live, not to one place, but dozens. News outlets, civil rights organizations, the FAA, the press, Across the country, phones buzzed, emails dinged, and a headline began spreading like wildfire. Tech CEO secretly tests airline bias. Entire crew under federal investigation after shocking findings. Inside the aircraft, the passengers were finally allowed to exit, slowly, in small groups. Some moved quickly, eyes averted. Others lingered, whispering, shaken by what they had just witnessed. The man who had once been quietly pushed to the hucks was now the only one being escorted out by a full legal and security team, as an honored guest, not with flashing lights, but with silent reverence. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The systems he built had already seen everything. By midnight, the airline had released a rushed, cold statement. "We take these allegations seriously and are conducting an internal review." By 8 a.m., that statement was being torn apart on every major news network, because the people watching weren't just interested in apologies. They were asking questions, real questions. Why had so many complaints been ignored before? Why did passengers with black or brown names report being downgraded more often, but never received explanations? Why did the data, now made public, show a clear pattern of who was moved, who was ignored, and who was silenced? Why had the company built a policy that made bias look like standard protocol? In a boardroom high above the city, the airline's top executives sat in stiff silence as the CEO paced in front of a giant flat screen. Behind him, social media metrics, stock drops, shareholder threats, and more. "Explain to me," the CEO barked, slamming a printed flight manifest on the table, "why our most high-profile passenger of the year was treated like luggage." No one had an answer. Across the screen, trending now, business class bias, 7.3 million mentions in less than 24 hours. The PR manager cleared her throat. "We've suspended the entire crew pending investigation. The supervisor, Mara, has been placed on leave." "That's not going to cut it," the CEO muttered, rubbing his temples. Another exec leaned in. "We've confirmed the man on..." "That flight is the D. Cole, the one who turned down a $1.8 billion buyout offer just last quarter." There was a heavy silence. Then the legal counsel spoke. "He built the algorithm that flagged our airline for bias 6 months ago. We ignored it. He just proved it himself." Meanwhile, in a small apartment across the city, the young flight attendant sat at her kitchen table. In front of her, the crew tablet she had taken a photo of, the one showing his name flagged. For reassignment, her inbox was full. Anonymous messages, thank yous, interviews, offers, but none of that mattered as much as the sealed envelope she now held in her hands. Inside, an official job offer. Director of Ethics and Accountability at Kohl's Company. She read the opening line again. "We saw what you did when no one else had the courage to speak up. Now, we'd like to offer you a chance to help us change the system that forced you to choose silence in the first place." Tears welled in her eyes, not because of the title or the salary, but because for the first time in her life, someone saw her not as replaceable, but essential. In another corner of the city, the journalist finally published her full piece. It opened with one line. "I boarded that flight expecting turbulence in the skies. I didn't expect to witness it in the cabin." The article went viral within hours. Her blog, once quiet, now crashed from traffic. News anchors quoted her notes. Other journalists followed the story, and in every mention, the same phrase kept appearing. The man in 27B, because he had shown the world something powerful, that racism, bias, and inequality don't always arrive in shouting or violence. Sometimes they wear name tags, speak softly, smile while they move your seat. But this time, they did it to the wrong man, and he didn't raise his voice. He raised a mirror. Within 48 hours, the airline suspended 5 executives. 3 lawsuits were filed, and a congressional subcommittee requested a hearing on discrimination in travel algorithms. What was supposed to be a normal flight had just sparked a national conversation. And for the first time, that conversation wasn't being led by hashtags alone, but by evidence, experience, and a man who let the system reveal itself. By sitting in the very seat they didn't want him to have. 2. Weeks had passed since the flight, and the world had shifted, not all at once, not everywhere, but the ripple had begun. The story of a quiet man, seated in 27B, who said nothing when pushed back, but made the whole world look closer, had done what most press conferences, hashtags, and protests often failed to do. It made people stop, not because it was loud, but because it was honest, because it was human, and because, this time, they couldn't pretend not to see it. In a glass-walled office, 52 stories above the city, the man behind it all stood watching the skyline, the same man who had been asked to move for someone more important, the same man who gave up his seat without resistance, but never gave up his power. The same man who had turned one small act of bias into a mirror held up to an entire industry. His name was now on magazine covers. He had refused all interviews, but the footage, the data, and the story had already traveled too far to be silenced. The message had landed. Behind him, Taylor, his assistant, was reading out loud from a new report. 3 more airlines have announced third-party bias audits. 2 are hiring ethicists. One's calling it the Cole Protocol. She glanced up. "You're trending in India now." He didn't smile, just nodded. This was never about me. She knew he meant it. In fact, that was the reason this all worked, because he had let the system expose itself. No yelling, no threats, just truth, and a quiet man who made space for it to be seen. At the same time, across town, the young former flight attendant walked into her new office. She still felt a little out of place. The title on her door said director, but the part of her who used to hand out peanuts at 30,000 feet was still adjusting. Her first meeting was with a group of engineers and legal experts, all working on redesigning how bias is tracked in customer service platforms. But her favorite meeting of the day came after that, when she sat with a young intern, newly hired, who had been bumped from flights 3 times in a single year because of system errors. He told her, "I used to think I was imagining it." She replied, "You weren't. That's why you're here." In a classroom 2 states over, a middle school teacher projected an article onto the smartboard. The headline read, "From Business Class to 27B, the flight that exposed what we all needed to see." "Can anyone tell me what this story's really about?" the teacher asked. One girl raised her hand. "It's about who they think we are before we even open our mouths." The room fell quiet. Then a boy added, "And about someone who didn't fight back the usual way, but still won." At the heart of it all was that one flight, one seat, and one decision, to say nothing, but record everything. The man had known something most people never realize, that systems don't change just because you shout at them. They change when you prove them wrong, in their own language, when you shine a light not on just one mistake, but on the entire map of decisions that led there. He had given them the space to choose better. And they didn't. That was the evidence. And now, change had no choice but to begin. In a quiet prison visitation room, a young man sat across from his sister, the former flight attendant, with a hopeful expression. He was holding a letter. A judge had reopened his case. The surveillance algorithm that helped convict him had been ruled unreliable, based on the data released from the airline investigation. He looked at his sister. "You think I'm really getting out?" She reached across the glass, eyes shining. "No, I know you are." And in that moment, he smiled for the first time in years, because that flight didn't just change one man's seat. It was now changing lives. The man from 27B never posted about the flight, never gave a statement, never said a word to the press. But when asked by his team why he did it, why he risked his privacy, his name, his comfort, he simply said, "Because I've been moved all my life. Moved aside, moved down, moved around. I just wanted the world to see what that really feels like, when you're not nobody, but they treat you like one anyway. And if we got lucky, maybe someone else out there watching wouldn't feel so alone the next time it happened to them." That was it. No mic drop, no revenge, just truth. And now that truth had found its way into boardrooms, airports, classrooms, legal systems, even living rooms, it had become something more powerful than rage. It had become a movement. The airline eventually rebranded. They updated policies, fired executives, partnered with advocacy groups. They changed slogans, painted over old colors, but no amount of paint would erase what happened on that flight. Because millions of people had seen it now, a mirror held up at cruising altitude, and the reflection could never be ignored again. So if you ever find yourself on a plane and you see someone being moved, ignored, or treated like they don't belong, don't stay silent. Don't assume it's a mistake. Don't look away. Because someone, somewhere, is watching. And their silence might not be weakness. It might just be the start of a storm, a quiet revolution, in seat 27B.